All right, welcome back, everybody. Today is the day we get into the data analysis portion of this class. Obviously, I'm guessing many of you are a little nervous about this section because what you should potentially have in front of you as you're watching this video is a data set that I am hoping you will be able to use to make an analysis for the project that you're running and hopefully then use that for your final paper. Now, obviously, we're coming from different places in terms of how familiar we are with analyzing data, but since you should have had two stats classes by the time you've taken this course, I'm hoping you at least are capable of doing some very basic analyses like correlation coefficients, t-tests, or even an f-test if your data sort of merits that type of an analysis. So, as you probably are already aware, watching this video, earlier this week, Saturday, I emailed everybody. I'm recording this in advance. It's kind of weird with the timing, but I emailed everybody on Saturday data sets from the project proposals that they wrote up. Now, if I couldn't figure out what the heck you were doing, I might have sent you an email saying I need more from you before I can send you a data set. But my hope is the vast majority of you are sitting here watching this video with a data set in front of you that is an Excel file. Now, if you're familiar with how to do analyses in Excel, great. You can do everything you need with this particular program. But if you're more familiar with SPSS or R or any other statistical program that's out there, you're more than welcome to take this data set that I sent to you that's specifically labeled your data set. And I'm going to keep this in my file so I know what everybody got. You can take the data set that's there, transfer it to those programs, and you can do the analyses the ways you want. Now, just so we're all on the same page as to what you probably were sent, what you were going to have been sent is a data set that has participants in the first column. You're going to have variable 1 in the second column and variable 2 in the third column. Some of you indicated that you wanted to do a study with like 4, 5, or 6 different variables. You needed to whittle that down. So if anything, what you were sent in addition to what you see here is something on a third variable, but I capped it at 3 variables. You will see usually with each data set that you got is a list of participants. I believe everybody got exactly 10 participants for the study, which in the real world, that's probably not sufficient to run a really adequate study, but just for simplification, that's what we did. And then you're going to get data that's pertaining to what it is you wanted to study. So if you were looking at the impacts of video game playing on overall reported stress, the data that kind of looked at those two things, hours of video game playing and per week and reported levels of stress through some questionnaire. If you were interested in looking at rates of depression based on social media use, or we're looking at, I don't know what were some of the other things that were mentioned, childhood trauma, experiencing it or not, and whether or not that impacted overall performance with respect to anxiety and depression. These are all ideas that people have proposed. Whatever you wrote down, I tried to come up with variables that sort of matched those things that you were discussing. So let's say we did have somebody do a study that looked at hours of TV paired up with anxiety levels that they reported on a scale of 1 to 10. So the average hours of television per day, and we had these people reporting things, something like this. I'm just coming up with random numbers off the cuff. And their reported levels of anxiety in a scale of 1 to 10. Again, just totally making things up off the cuff. This might have been the data set that you got, just those 2 variables. If that's all you got, because that's what you said you wanted to study, then you might have a pretty simple analysis to do. you're looking at this, what I'm seeing here is one scale variable, second scale variable, and you're looking at how well those two things to go together. So I'm guessing in your minds, you already know, well, if I'm looking at how well things go together, I'm running a correlation coefficient. And there are ways to analyze these correlation coefficients, again, in a whole bunch of different places. So in Excel, I believe, you can just do correlate B2 to B11 with C2 to C11, and it'll give you a correlation coefficient of, which is negative 0.02, which means essentially there's no correlation between these two. This is something that you could potentially do. And let's say I gave you a third one, so it wasn't anxiety that mattered, but maybe depression could be linked to hours of 6, person had 2, 10, 5, 1, 1. Just gonna try to make stuff up that would give us a pretty strong correlation. All right, so let's say that's what we did. So we do again the correlation coefficient between B2 to B11 and B2 to B11, and find a super strong correlation coefficient between those two things. All right, this could be really cool data to find in what I'm sending you, or you could find nothing, right? It will vary from thing to thing, and just to see if there's a correlation between anxiety levels, just so you can see me going through it again, C2 to C11, and D2 to D11. You can run that correlation. We'll do a correlation of negative 0.13, probably nothing of significance. You could even run the t-test on that to see whether or not that is significant instead of and if you've got the R program or SPSS and you're familiar with how to run those, they will actually help you find the significant levels, which is unfortunately one of those things you get automatically with this Excel file, even as you can see, running it's a pretty simple process. And from these things, you have something that you can report from. Now, this is one type of analysis you might run. Others have talked about, things that are not on a correlational basis. They're more about comparison tests, those t-tests. So let's say you do one of those three where you're looking at if people were abused or not. Right? So you ask people to experience childhood abuse, which was a topic that somebody brought up. If you're wondering where that came off of, when I'm writing this down, and you want to look at if there's a relationship between those that were abused and those that weren't. Now, as you can see here, when I do this particular analysis, relational study, I can find a correlation or no correlation between these two things. But it's important to note that this, in this particular instance, is not a correlation study, right? What you're running is a comparison study at this point. So you're looking at the difference between those that experienced abuse, maybe the ones that are labeled a 1, and those that reported not having experienced that abuse with respect to their reported anxiety levels. Now, in this case, with this particular made-up data, you might find a significant difference between these two groups. You might not. You might find differences in the averages, which you would report, but you might not find something that's significant, even if you do find differences in terms of the averages. Being familiar with those statistical tools that you should have learned in those past classes is going to be really critical when you're going through this portion of the process. But I'm going to try to make things easier for you by keeping it simple like this. Get 2 or 3 variables. You really want to see in your analyses of the data, which is going to be the assignment that you're going to be given, where you're going to be asked, what did you find? What type of analysis did you do? Did you find something significant? Can you report the effect size? Questions that you should be able to understand. And if you need help with it, by all means, then hopefully, you can get through this really challenging portion of the process that, even though it's work, it shouldn't take you too long. Note when you're doing this, you will always get participants listed here, but participants are never a variable. These are randomly assigned numbers given to individuals. The variables that you're dealing with are the ones that are listed in the later columns. And again, you're going to be doing some type of comparison test, a t-test or an f-test or a correlational measure based on the data that you came up with. If you have questions about this along the way, I'm happy to talk with you and go through it, but I am not going to be capable of doing the analysis. It's not my role in this process, because when you move on to that senior thesis, you're going to need to collect your own data. Can't be made up like this. You're going to collect it from participants, and you're going to need to not only do the analysis, so figure out what type of analysis you're going to do, but then you're going to need to be able to interpret, say, yeah, this is what I found, this makes sense. So for this class, at least in this first iteration of it, when you're doing the analysis, I ask that you try to run the tests that you think you should run, report the data the way you think you should report it, and then I can sort of give you feedback on if you were on the right track and the things that you maybe need to consider as we're moving forward. It's kind of a minimal risk situation that I really want you to test whether or not you're a good place to be able to do these things. It's very hard here at the school to ensure that you've gotten subsequent training time and time again in the different classes to where this should be a very doable thing. But again, I totally get that most of you are coming from a wide array of different places, and how familiar you are with these tools and the analyses can vary dramatically from person to person. But when you move on to the next step, you're going to be expected to be able to do this without the assistance that you're providing right now. It's going to be kind of on you. So try first on your own. We'll have some collaboration, talk about what makes sense if something went awry, so you can move on in this process within this class in the right direction. But first, let's try this on our own. If you've got questions or I've got confusion about what variables you're using, by all means we can talk, but again, I want you to give this a stab for this particular week after you look over that data that you're being sent. Hopefully that all makes sense, and hopefully when you see the questions as to what you need to answer, it's crystal clear as to what's being looked for in this. And hopefully you have some fun with this, revisiting some of the old types of tests that you came into, and just getting a chance to see data relating to the topic that you're interested in, and of seeing it play out as if you were doing these studies, even though obviously the data that you're getting is just stuff I'm making up off the cuff. Um, as always, if there was something confusing about this presentation, let me know. I'm always happy to meet with you and just make sure that you're crystal clear on what's expected. It's just, again, I can't do the analysis. I can't even tell you which specific analysis you're going to do. That's sort of dictated by the data that you have and your kind of familiarity with what you should do with that specific data. But for now, I think we've covered everything we need. So good luck with this. Hopefully everybody's feeling good about their projects and not thinking about pivoting at this point in the semester, because we are pretty far in at this juncture. But there is needs to reconsider stuff, and there's kind of a recognition that something's not quite going right with the projects that you're thinking about doing. Reach out, let me know, and I'm happy to help you try to figure out what's the best path forward for you. For today, I'm going to bid you adieu. Take care, and I hope to speak to you all soon. And otherwise, I'll see you all next week when we get to the next video.